Hello there, my name is Mooseman, and today I'll be informing you of whether you should play, wait, or avoid the naval combat game Man of War Corsair. As always, we will be looking at gameplay, aesthetics, future potential, and value before making our final verdict on the early access version of Man of War Corsair. Man of War Corsair is a video game adaptation of the now discontinued Warhammer-themed tabletop game also named Man of War. The objective of the game is to build up a ship and crew to sail the seas to search for treasure, pirate other ships, and build alliances with factions. The main gameplay has you sailing your ship using the wind to determine your speed and mobility. Combat is done through the use of cannons by simply adjusting your range indicator to match where you want your shot to go. In addition to long-range combat, you can also board enemy ships and engage in combat between the crews. The crews will fight until one ship surrenders, and while you currently can't take over someone else's ship, you can take whatever cargo they were carrying. If at any time you are killed or your ship is destroyed, it's game over and you must either restart or load the last save file to continue. Man of War does a very good job balancing realism with fantasy in a way that makes the combat feel realistic, but not at the expense of fun. One of the biggest problems I've had getting into naval combat games in the past is that a lot of them were too focused on creating a realistic ship experience instead of a fun one. Man of War accomplishes this by making every ship have a unique set of weaponry. Instead of just having more advanced ships be simply bigger versions of the smaller ships, more advanced ships will be outfitted with crazy weapons such as catapults, drills, rams, and absurdly huge forward cannons, just to name a few. What this does is increase the depth of gameplay immensely. While the gameplay is more simplistic than other naval combat games, having to adapt and deal with an unprecedented variety of ships keeps the gameplay from getting stale. A tactic that worked on a standard human Corsair ship may completely backfire on an orc ship. For instance, the first time I encountered an orc ship, it was much smaller than me, but it was outfitted with a drill and a paddle propulsion system. Naturally, I tried to gain distance on the ship, but the paddle propulsion made it faster than I was, and they ended up doing massive damage just by ramming me head on. I later discovered that while the paddle system was faster, it was also more fragile, and I could effectively take out the entire ship simply by focusing my cannons on the rear instead of on the main hull. It's scenarios like this that really set Man of War ahead in terms of both fun factor and variety compared to other naval combat games. That being said, the game still suffers from the same thing that nearly all naval combat games suffer from: endless, boring sailing. When you're actually in combat and near clusters of cities, the game really shines, but anytime you need to travel to another location, you will be bored out of your mind because of how far apart everything is. The game does allow you to speed up time up to 2 times speed, but this honestly still doesn't help, and nothing short of 5 times speed would make the long voyages feel bearable. The main progression in the game is done through collecting gold by doing quests, trading goods between towns, and plundering goods from other ships. After you get enough gold, you will be able to buy a new ship. While your starting ship is actually one of the most well-rounded ships in the game, you can use this opportunity to buy specialized ships that will allow you to do certain quests more effectively. You may not be able to take out bigger orc ships using your starter ship, and that's where a slower ship with a large cannon in the front may become useful. The problem with this is that Man of War's quest system is incredibly unbalanced. As it stands, there are some quests that can take you a very significant amount of time that often reward you with much lower gold than simple quests such as racing other ships. I had a quest that had multiple parts and choices, only for the total reward to be 500 gold, which is not even enough to repair the damage done to my ship during the mission. There are also a lot of random events that can net you tons of gold in the open world, and even just going out and killing pirates can net you significantly more gold than actually questing, and after a while I just started ignoring any quest that wasn't on the way of where I was headed next. The economy in Man of War is another instance where the game simplifies something that I, as a casual naval combat gamer, found a bit difficult in other games. Local production, local demand can raise and lower the price, but if you're looking to simply buy and sell, the game tells you on average what you spent on the product, making it extremely easy to determine when you are getting a good deal. While the core gameplay is decent, as it stands there is very little content actually in the game at the moment. The map is deceivingly big. After you reach Arnau, you are restricted from going any further and are instantly teleported teleported backwards. This is unfortunate as I spent a lot of time preparing my ship for the voyage to the new set of cities, and to have it blocked without any kind of warning was a bit disheartening. This also means, as far as I've seen, only orcs and humans are currently in the game. While I am okay with early access lacking content, I'm not okay with getting blindsided on how little content is currently in the game, and wish the developers had made it more clear somewhere as to exactly how much of the shown area was currently playable. The overall aesthetic in Man of War is not that great. Firstly, the game suffers from overall poor looking graphics and visual effects. Even on the highest settings, the game looks grainy and jagged overall, and any smoke or fog effects are basically just floating JPEGs. Another bad thing about the graphics is that there's constant clipping of almost every item in the game. Sails, sailors, and enemies all lack any kind of realistic physics-based interaction besides boarding, and honestly, I'd be hard-pressed to find any moment where something didn't look wrong visually. The water also lacks any kind of physics-based interaction, resulting in a lot of scenarios where the entire boat is underwater when there should be waves crashing over the ship instead. The monsters bring out the worst in this, as a megalodon racing toward you in the water looks more like a ghost passing along a floor than a fish gliding through water. Where the game's aesthetic is strongest is in the ship design. Each ship is uniquely designed around a race that pilots it, and while that only consists of humans and orcs thus far, I can't think of a ship that I've been disappointed in design-wise. Outside of the cannon shots, the audio in the game is also lackluster. Sailors repeat the same things over and over, and what's supposed to sound like sailor banter just ends up sounding like random audio clips that rarely have any context. The music in the game is actually very good, but there isn't enough of it. The only time the music comes on is when you're in combat, with there being an odd level of silence when you're just sailing on the open ocean. As I mentioned earlier, sailing is a long process, and I found that turning on sailing-themed music playlists was extremely helpful to the overall immersion, and I hope that in the future they add more music to fill these silences. One final note kind of regarding aesthetics is that the overall performance in the game is varied, and the game suffers from a lot of hitching, where every little while you'll get the game freezing completely and then jumping back up to full FPS. And it's not a recording issue that's causing the game to look like this. This tends to happen a lot when you're getting in view distance of other ships and cities, and hopefully this gets fixed during the early access period in addition to general optimization to get the frame rate more consistent. I think that the developers are on the right track in terms of future potential from looking at their description in the Steam store page. The biggest thing that needs to be added immediately though is the quest log. At this time, the only way to keep track of your quest is by looking in the upper right hand corner while sailing, which only gives you a brief summary of what you're supposed to do. When juggling multiple quests, oftentimes there's not enough room to hold all the quests in that corner, so you have situations where you completely forget what you're supposed to do. This is especially annoying during stockpile quests, since you need to go get a specific number of item and bring it to a specific port, and that can be difficult to accomplish without writing down which item goes where. Man of War is currently a single player only game, however the developers have expressed the desire to put in multiplayer at a later date once all the core features are added. I definitely think the game could use some multiplayer, as building a fleet with your friends to go fight other players could be a lot of fun. On the more interesting side of multiplayer, having a game mode that allows players to be one of the various sea monsters could also be a lot of fun. The game also has some nasty bugs that need to be fixed. Saving can crash the game completely and fail to save the game, and quest markers can disappear entirely after loading a save. These were the two worst bugs I saw during my time playing, as they caused me to lose my entire game progress twice. The game is priced at $30, and for the amount of content currently provided, that's quite a bit too high. If the game stays on course and delivers everything that's promised by the developers, then the $30 price tag becomes extremely reasonable. But there really isn't more than 5 or 6 hours of content available at this time, and most of that ends up being sailing. Man of War Corsair is a game that really accentuates the strengths of the naval combat genre with simple, satisfying, and most importantly, varied ship-to-ship combat while also solving a lot of the weaknesses of the genre by not being overly realistic. That being said, the game is still very early access and needs quite a bit more polish and content to really make it worth your time. And so my final verdict on Man of War Corsair is to wait. Man of War Corsair has a lot of potential to be a great addition to the naval combat genre, but as it stands, there's just nowhere near enough content to justify the current price. Thank you for watching this episode of Play, Wait or Avoid. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more news, reviews, and other gaming commentary. If you're looking for another review, you could check out my last video which I reviewed the game Chiku, a deadly combination of Flappy Bird and Super Meat Boy. Or if you're looking for something a little bit different, my last episode of Questioning Gaming looked at the pros and cons of upgrading to Windows 10, with gaming specifically in mind.
We're by the wind, Captain!